Hello and welcome to another Tuesday talk with Ruby Reese. My name is Killian and I'm co-founder at Ruby Reese, and I will also be your host. So this week I've been reflecting quite a lot about our dogs and their ancestral past as wolves, and this the 10,000 years plus that of evolution that they've gone through to get where they are today. And I suppose the dependency now that the species of dogs have on humans and on our decisions, how our dogs today, they depend on us for their food, their the environments that they live in, how they interact with the environments that they live in, how whether or not they get to interact with nature, and all of this comes together. Their mental stimulation, absolutely everything we have such a say in. So this is really interesting when you kind of make the comparison, and I know it's important to point out we're not insinuating that dogs are wolves. We're not insinuating that they're close to wolves. We do realize that, not every dog wakes up in the morning and thinks, I need to go out and start hunting. But predation will be our topic today. And that's, it does raise interesting questions of what tiny remnants of this history still exist in our dogs today. And I suppose, interestingly enough as well, because we have so much control with every aspect of how our dogs live and what they come in contact with and how they eat and when they eat and what they see and what they do, I suppose it really kind of harks back a little bit to the beginnings of Ruby Reese. And I was thinking a lot about many of you know that our company was born kind of out of a place of frustration, if you want to look at it like that, in that our own French bulldog Ruby has food allergies, and she was struggling quite a lot with those allergies. And we ended up going down a rabbit hole to do with ingredients and ingredients lists, and we decided that we really, really wanted to put together a brand where top ingredients are used, preferably short ingredients lists where possible, and also this element of disclosure, that our customers should have agency, should be able to make choices for themselves, and should really be disclosed what's actually in the products that they're considering, because I think only with the right information can you make true decisions on behalf of your dog, basically. So it really hits home when, because obviously when you're thinking about it, we have all the control, and we have a duty then that comes along with it to choose products that are of high quality and that are going to add something to your dog's life, particularly in the area of nutrition. I mean, often many humans decide for their dogs that they're going to have one brand of dog food for their entire lives. So it's kind of up to the human race then to decide whether that's actually going to be as balanced and varied enough for a dog, and that opens a can of worms of its own. But I think there are still choices, particularly in the nutritional supplement area, where people have a lot of agency and a lot of control still to add little bits and pieces to kind of round that out as well. And of course this goes across all sorts of ranges. Then it's the ingredients and the materials, and when you're using high quality, you're going to end up with a better result usually. So in talking about how our dogs used to live when they were way back when they're modern day cousins, the wolves, when they're out and about, they're predators, so they're looking for their food themselves, and they're quite independent in the wild. So this is a really, really interesting topic, and I've spoken with our guest, who will be shortly listening into the conversation on, but we've had this guest previously when we were doing live chats, and Darina suggested at the time to do Predation, so I've begged her to come back and do actually 2 sessions. This podcast is going to be split into this week's podcast and next week, because the topic is so huge, and I realized that last time that there was so much more to discover, and we've tried to look at the entire predatory sequence. So this would be quite. I don't want to go into it too much, but the entire predatory sequence that a predator would actually use in the wild, or would usually go through in the wild, that we would go through this, how it would look in nature in its original form, so via the wolf or the large cat or any predatory mammal, but we would also look at it then in a modern day application, where the remnants, where the whispers of these predatory instincts kind of whisper through and into the modern world, and how our dogs express these, and they're certainly miles and miles away from where they originally come from. And I certainly, when I first started learning about predation, had never put 2 and 2 together, and this topic is going to interest you a lot if you're already getting a bit excited. There's so many examples in here that are just like, wow, the penny drop moment. So because there's so much of that, we've split it into the 2 weeks. So it'll be this week and next week. Then we will take up the second half of the predatory sequence once again. So without further ado, buckle up your seatbelt, because we're going in for a really, really interesting part 1 with Darina. Hello, Darina. Thank you so much for joining us on Tuesday Talks. How are you doing today?
Hi, Killian. I'm brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks for asking.
Will you do us the pleasure of introducing yourself briefly?
Yeah, hi. My name is Darina, and I am the head trainer of Polaris Dog Training, which is a small training and walking company based in North County, Dublin. Myself, I've been in the industry now for nearly 9 years, and I have 3 lurchers at home, all rescues, Nico, Cruz and Milo, who keep me very busy.
Very good. And you have yet again decided to come on and talk to us about predation and the predatory sequence. We've already had a chat about this on Instagram, and now we're ready to go even more in depth. So I'm super excited for this. Will we start off by giving a little background as to what even is predation and what's the predatory sequence?
Yeah, so predation is our dog's genetic instinctual need to hunt. So it's their genetic need to hunt, catch, chase, and sometimes kill prey animals. So this comes from, when we see it in the wild, this comes from our dog's genetic cousins, which would be wolves. So we would see the full sequence in wolves, where they would need to participate in this sequence in order to be able to survive. Obviously, our pet dogs, being pet dogs, we're going to see elements of this genetic sequence in our dogs today, but not necessarily the entire sequence.
So we're not trying to insinuate that our dogs are wolves, right? There's 10,000 years
not.
Approximately of evolution there.
Oh, and then some, yeah. So
exactly.
we're talking at least about 30,000 years between our dogs' ancestral cousins and what dogs are now today.
And I suppose to contextualize, would it be fair to compare it to our human flight or fight instincts? You know, that might not necessarily be relevant for today, but we've instincts that come from our deep in our past.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, you walk down a dark street, your amygdala tells you, be careful. That is just a remnant of how we would have evolved to be more wary at nighttime, whereas our dogs, we've now bred them to follow certain patterns in this hunting sequence in order for us to be able to better utilize certain genetic skills that they have in order to work for us and to make our lives a little bit easier, which obviously now in the modern age, where we're seeing less importance as opposed to where it would have been maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, where all dogs would have been working breeds and all served a certain purpose. Whereas now we're very modern with our pet dogs, and everything's very suburban at the moment. So if we want to talk about the predatory sequence, so how we would see this manifesting in wolves, I'm going to talk about the complete sequence, and then we'll pick out different parts of it and how it manifests with our pet dogs. So the full
Sure.
sequence, we would be looking at orientate, we would be looking at stalk, we'd be looking at sight, orientate, sight, stalk, chase, grab by, kill by, and kill, dissect, and consume. But there is actually one element that I would maybe throw in there for pet dogs, which would be parade. So in pet dogs, we would see the orientate, the sight, the stalk, the chase, the catch, the kill, and we would maybe see parade before we see dissection, and consumption.
Wow, that's amazing, because that's so true. You see some of these things, and I know where you're going with some of these titles, and especially for the modern world where these come out, and it's fascinating because we do see this parade behavior in Ruby. I know where you're going with it.
Yeah.
But we'll go through each of the parts of the sequence. So will we begin at the beginning, at the orient?
So when our dogs are orientating, so we all go out, you walk down the street and you see your dog sniffing, you get to the park, and you might see the sniffing changes a little bit, where we see our dogs maybe tracking along the ground. So that's the orientation. They're smelling something, and they're using their noses to try and get closer to this target smell. So we would see that very often, especially kind of more in park environments. We would see it sometimes in some urban environments, especially if we have foxes or wildlife in and out of our gardens. We might even see it in the morning times. You let your dog out and they're going around the grass, sniffing and orientating to try and find this higher concentration of this smell, or the fresher concentration of this particular smell. So orientate would be the one that we would see the most common in nearly all breeds of dogs across the board.
And why do we think that it's more commonly seen in natural environments like a park as opposed to out on a street? Is it because there are more interesting scents there, or is it that it's easier to track something because cars haven't been driving over it? Or do we have an idea of why dogs look
Well,
at...
yeah, you're kind of like hitting the nail on the head there. So like in parks, we're going to see more wild animals. Wild animals will trigger an instinctual response with our dogs because the smell smells way better than some Joe Soap's runners on the side of on the sidewalk, which our dogs can smell as well. Our dogs can smell the molecules of everything that's crossed these paths, but it doesn't always interest them. Whereas we're out in the park, they are instinctually tuned in to enjoy the smell of wildlife. So they will pick up a scent, and it's interests them far more than most scents that they would find on the street.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're going to find a rabbit or a hare's trail a lot more interesting to smell than a postman's bicycle wheel or whatever it is.
Exactly,
it's not exactly going to be the same thing. Okay, so this orientation, this was obviously originally interesting for a dog because it helped them to find the source to their food, right?
Yeah, that's it exactly. So we still see that in, like I was saying, we still see that in pet dogs where they will track and follow scents in the park. Their wild cousins, wolves, will do this to find prey because they need to hunt to survive. Our dogs are domestic animals. They no longer need to do that, but they still find intrinsic joy in the seeking. So when we're looking at the predation sequence, there's a lot of chemical stuff going on in our dog's brain. So within the seeking, our dogs get a huge release of dopamine. So, which, if you're ADHD, you know what I mean. It's a bit of an addictive hormone. It makes you feel good, so you're looking for that feel good, but it will naturally release in the dog's brain. Just seeking out the potential prey can often be enough to just satisfy a dog's innate instinctual need to hunt.
And then looking in, going back a couple of 100 or 1,000 years in human history, some of our ancestors looked at dogs and said, wow, these guys are really good at sniffing along the ground and finding a path, right? So they selectively bred dogs to do
Yeah.
that specific function, right?
So there would be a bit of arguments kind of because we don't know how dogs domesticated. We don't know
Sure.
how whether or not we intentionally done it, but we didn't. That they were the first animal that humans ever domesticated. So the likelihood of cavemen human actually knowing what they were doing is very slim. But then there's
Mhm.
also the possibility of wolves self-domesticating when humans started to form settlements and wolves realize, there's some free grub here. But we don't really know exactly which came first, the chicken or the egg, or if it was just a happenstance.
It
Um,
was, yeah, it was probably the truth
a bit of
often
both.
lies in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, where maybe humans realized that having the wolf packs nearby was safer for them, and the wolf packs would have realized being near the humans was easier for food, and it was just a symbiotic relationship that just developed into domestication.
And then,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry,
and
go
then
ahead.
I was going to ask about then the development of breeds, selective breeding for specific traits then as well. So is this something that we can see today, that specific breeds of dogs then are really, really
100%.
good at doing certain things?
Yeah, 100%. So we'll see there are certain breeds that we have now selectively bred, in particular for orientating and following tracks and scent. So we'll see this with bloodhounds, we'll see it an awful lot with gun dogs as well. If you look at the airport, what are the breeds of dogs they most traditionally use for searching luggage or searching cars or vehicles, whether it's customs or bomb disposal? An awful lot of the time they use gun dogs in particular, or
Hmm.
mostly gun dogs because they're uh, easier to train than scent hounds. Scent hounds, in particular, though, would be more attuned to following tracks and hunting wildlife as opposed to kind of working in a more urbanized setting. But yeah, we definitely see these elements have been bred in particular to highlight this particular element of the predation sequence.
And I mean, I suppose it makes total sense to us all as well that, if your dog already really likes doing something, then if you want to employ them in that function later on, it's so much easier to train a dog to do something that they love doing, right? So it
Exactly,
makes
exactly.
makes total sense that certain breeds kind of were selected over the years for doing certain functions. Um, and I suppose we can use different parts of the sequence as well then to enrich our dogs' lives, right? So how could we enrich our dogs' lives particularly for the ones that love sniffing around and finding a trail?
100%. So my own dog personally, so I do scent work with all of my dogs. So my youngest dog Nico is 2 and my oldest dog Milo is 13, and we've done scent work for years. So
Mhm.
it's specific scent detection. I've trained them to find specific scents, and when they find it they alert me to let me know. But you don't have to get as complex as that. Again, it depends on the breed of dog. So if you have a dog that loves tracking scent, then maybe you might actually want to try canine tracking or man trailing, where you're literally teaching a dog how to find a human, which gives them that outlet. They're seeking and they're getting that dopamine release, and they're working, and they still get to find their designated target where they get their reward. Um, or it doesn't need to be so complicated. Literally, if you've got a dry fed dog, a handful of their morning breakfast, scatter it in the grass in the morning and let them seek out the food. They'll get the same dopamine release searching for their food and seeking that out as my dogs do when they're searching for something like gun oil. The same chemical reaction happens, and it really, really offers them such a release and channels that instinctual need. But even to go to the park, put your dog on a long line and let their noses lead the way. That's also giving them an opportunity to do that instinctual need.
The sniffaris are great. You hear it a lot
Yeah.
among the greyhound owners and things like that. But Ruby loves a good sniffari as well around the
Can't beat a
neighborhood.
sniffari.
See what's going on in the area.
Yeah.
Um, and I love the fact that you brought up some simple options like scattering in the garden. We do this with Ruby when the weather is somewhat decent in Ireland.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
bring out a handful of treats and just scatter them in the garden,
yeah.
and she loves it. It's a great excuse for not cutting the grass too often as well. And if it's raining, we do it on the we often do it on the stairs. We scatter them on
Yeah.
different steps. So there's
Another
an
option
indoor
there
option.
would be a snuffle mat as well. So you can actually get snuffle mats or activity mats where you can scatter the food in there, or you can use something like a busy box. So if you're like me and you like getting online shopping, anytime a box gets delivered, you use the paper in the box, scatter some treats, and let your dog snuffle through the box to find the reward. And it's the same thing. It does the same chemical thing and gives them that same outlet.
And it's a mix of these things really is going to keep it interesting, isn't it? You know,
Yeah, yeah,
doing a snuffle mat is so exciting for a dog if they're doing it every now and then, and that, but if you're doing it every single day, it becomes just so habitual. So I think if
yeah.
you're doing like a mix of doing a little bit of this and little bit of that, really
Exactly. Yeah.
helps to keep it exciting as well, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So that our dogs they're not just going, oh, this again, even though they enjoy the sniffing, but they start to understand the game a little bit more, and you might find that, well, the snuffle mat's not lasting as long because there's only so many places you can hide treats
Yeah,
in a meter wide snuffle mat. Whereas if you mix it up, everything still stays fresh, and they still get the same excitement and enjoyment out of each different activity.
exactly. That's really great advice. And then moving on to the next step of the sequence, what comes next?
So sight. So this is where our dogs might fixate on things.
Hmm.
So if you're out, Ruby might spot something, and you can see her little ears perk up, and she might turn her head, stare. I found the thing. There it is in the tree. I found it. I found the source of the smell and the source of the noise.
Hmm.
So sight would definitely be so. When our dogs are orientating towards the scent, and then they finally get sight of the prey. So think of it that way. So there it is. I found the location. I found the source of the smell that I've been tracking this whole time. Um, Sight can often be one that triggers a lot of frustration though in a lot of dogs, because
Okay.
especially if what they've spotted moves, that's
Hmm.
when it will trigger the next part of the sequence, which we'll get into now in a few minutes.
Okay. So so this is obviously the useful part of it is really just to see and to lock in kind of on a target, I suppose,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah,
That's where it
exactly.
comes
Yeah,
from in the natural world.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas our dogs now, so we have like sight hounds in particular,
Hmm.
where they would have been bred specifically for hunting and to be more sensitive to movement on the horizon. So you might find a greyhound can spot something 2 or 3 football pitches away. I live in suburbia, so everything's measured by football pitches.
Yeah.
Whereas they might spot something 2 or 3 football pitches away.
Yeah.
Whereas a dog like Ruby, who's a Frenchie, she hasn't been bred to be that sensitive, for her eyesight to be that sensitive. She'd be like, don't know what he's staring at, I can't see it. So in
Yes. Okay.
particular, you'd find that one, especially with collies and sighthounds, because they've been bred to be very sensitive to movement.
I was going to say the guardian dogs, right? The protector kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
thing where they're overlooking, say, a flock of
yeah,
sheep or whatever.
exactly, and they're very sensitive. Like if you ever even just watch like you said, any of the guardian breeds, shepherds, a lot of the mountain dogs as well, they will literally, if you see them in the park and they're lying down, you can just see them watching everything. They're
Yeah, they've it
very
all
sensitive to
sussed.
that
They know
movement.
what's going on everywhere. They've
Exactly,
got the
exactly,
situation
exactly. Yeah,
down.
yeah.
Okay, and what I suppose this makes it a little bit more. This one might be a bit more difficult, is it, for enrichment and?
It is and it isn't. It depends on the breed of dog you have. So I'm going to talk specifically about my own dog. So
Mhm.
with Nico, when we're in the park, so there's lots of rabbits in my local park. So many
Yeah,
rabbits. Now Nico's always on leash, so he doesn't get a chance to chase and catch them because at the speed that he can run, he probably would be able to. Um, but what I allow him to look at the rabbits.
yeah.
So I've trained him to be at a point where he can see them. So he's tracking them along. He's having a great time. And then he goes, there they are. I found them. And so he gets an extra release by actually just looking at them. He gets to find and see them. But there are other ways that we can do this, like even playing at home, if you play ball with your dog, moving the ball really quickly along the ground before you kick it, that will trigger that need to follow and eye stalk the moving thing before they actually move towards it. So in particular, like if I'm playing with Nico, I might tease the ball a little bit, and I can see his whole body posture, his tail position changes, so that he's like, whoa, oh my God, it's moving. I can't wait to chase this. But he doesn't go to it. You can see the excitement that building up in him, getting to look at this thing moving. So it's a harder one to give our dogs an outlet for, but not
Hmm.
impossible.
Yes. And you can definitely gain their attention by, say the quick movements.
Yeah, exactly. Or, and like we've already touched on there, if we have a guardian breed, literally just sitting on a park bench and letting them watch things. That is an outlet for their orientate. Um, or if you have a collie, so you might find collies can be a little bit more sensitive to movement of everything. That includes traffic and the like. Um, so there are other games that you can play. So like tree ball, which you basically teach the dog how to herd
Hmm.
giant yoga balls. But that in itself, you can channel their need to want and watch stuff move by doing exactly like we just said, moving the ball slightly and watching them get ready for the chase.
Definitely. It sounds like these dogs actually could be great for some of the dog sports,
Yeah.
and even for the human sports. I can imagine bringing them along to a local hurling game and letting them watch the ball.
Or like Wimbledon.
Exactly,
Side to
exactly.
side,
So
yeah.
plenty of opportunities for them to watch things moving in the distance.
Exactly, yeah. So our next part in the sequence would be the stalk.
Yeah.
Now, the stalk is a harder one, again, for us to offer our dogs an outlet for. So the stalk would be, or the stalk or the creep would be when you see, in particular, we see it so often with cats, when you
Hmm.
see them hunting and they're creeping along right before they pounce. So
Yeah.
our dogs would do this, but you wouldn't see it as much in so many breeds. So collies in particular love the creep, love the stalk. And you even see, if you see collies in the park with their owner and their owner has a ball thrower, you watch the collie's body movements when the owner has the ball in the thrower. They're getting
Hmm.
so much more out of waiting for the ball to be thrown than they actually do from the actual throwing. They're stalking it and they're moving, they're back and forth. They're like, how can I control the movements of this ball? And it builds up the excitement before the throw. My own dog Cruz, he loves a good stalk of a pigeon. So
Hmm.
if he sees a pigeon, he'll do like a little creep. Thankfully, touch wood, he's never caught one. But he loves to stalk the pigeons. And we actually have a pigeon nesting in our back garden. So now Nico has started to do it in the back garden as well, where it's basically just trying to slowly creep up and close the distance with their prey without alerting the prey to their presence.
And it's so true, because I was thinking, I don't know if I've seen our friend She Ruby doing stalking behaviors before, but actually now that you mention it, we when she's on a long line in one of the woods near us, she there's ducks, there's quite a few ducks there. So when there's ducks in the grass chilling out, we know when she's going to start to chase them, and we stop it. So we're stopping it in the stalk. Her behavior changes just before she chases. So
Yeah,
it's definitely, she's stalking. It's so
yeah,
clear now. It's just
yeah,
the penny has dropped.
yeah. But maybe you've probably never seen it before because could probably only do it when she's triggered by a wild animal. So
Hmm.
you don't always see this one in many breeds. Like, so Nico's only starting to stalk now, and he'll be 3 in September. Cruz is 8. Milo's never done it. I've had 6 sighthounds total in my life, and they're the only two. Nico and Cruz are the only two that have ever done it. So you don't always see it. You might see it being triggered by wildlife, like you're seeing with Ruby,
Hmm.
but generally not all the breeds would actually display this.
Yeah. Okay. So it's very obvious where it came from. This is literally creeping up on their prey in the
Yeah.
natural world. And then for modern dogs, it's slightly more difficult to say use as an enriching
Yeah.
environment, really, isn't it?
With modern dogs as well, one of the reasons we wouldn't see it as often is because they don't have as much use for it, because
Hmm.
they don't rely on catching the prey in
Yeah.
order to survive. Whereas we would see this more in wilder animals. Like, you watch any David Attenborough documentary, you can see the cheetahs, the lions, the wolves, you can see them all doing it because their lives literally depend on the success of the hunt. Whereas our dogs don't. They just do it because they enjoy it. And
And sorry, go ahead.
no, yeah. So we would actually, so they do it because they enjoy it. Um, so a lot of the time, most dogs don't bother with it. It's like, there's the thing, I'm gonna go chase it because that's an adrenaline rush that they will get from that. Whereas some dogs will find, so dogs like Cruz or Ruby with the ducks, she'll find her enjoyment just as much in the anticipation of getting
Hmm.
closer to the target.
Yeah, exactly. And like you say, it's not that she genuinely wants to catch these. It's more that, God, that's really interesting over there in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
distance.
it's fun. It's our dogs do it for fun at this point.
And we've mentioned a couple of other species. So wild species, I'm talking about, like the wolves. You also mentioned the documentaries with wild cats.
Yeah.
Are predatory sequences across predators relatively similar,
Yeah,
or are there big differences?
yeah. So the predation sequence across the board for most predators, for most mammalian land predators, would be the
Hmm.
same. Obviously, I'm not talking about the avian birds or like that,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
yeah, for most land predators, it would follow the exact same sequence. Um, Different things can trigger differently for different animals, but like we can see, if I list out the predation sequence and you see cats out in the street, you can see the entire thing. They're orientating to get closer to a bird. They're stalking. The only thing they would most likely, our pet cats would most likely try and pounce as opposed to actually chase. So they use
Hmm.
the stalk more than anything to try and get as
Sure.
close as they possibly can to expel the least amount of energy.
Yes, and I suppose lots of different species have evolved in their own ways to make use of different parts of the sequence that make sense for their landscape, their prey,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah, exactly. Whereas because our dogs are related to wolves, wolves are pack animals with
Hmm.
unbelievably long stamina. So they can stalk and orientate, but they can also just chase down the prey because their stamina is so strong. So that's why a lot of the time the chase instinct is so strong across the board for most of our dogs.
Okay. And this is probably a good point to move across to chase, the next
Yeah.
step.
Yes. So we're kind of like, spoiler. So after stalk, then we would see chase. Once our dogs have closed the gap on their prey, we would
Yeah.
see a chase incur. So obviously most obviously seen in greyhounds and sighthounds of the like, where they have been specifically bred to chase down these animals and be able to catch them. Hence why
Hmm.
they're so fast. Um,
Yes.
so um we would see an awful lot of frustration around this in particular, because living in a suburban area, in a suburban environment, our dogs generally don't get to rehearse this one as much. And this one is a harder one to offer them outlets for because it can be a danger to wildlife and even other small animals in our vicinity if a chase is triggered.
Yes. And is this often seen then, like how are we doing it? Like, I mean, is this where dogs are running after the tennis ball, for example?
Yeah, so the chase instinct for balls would be very similar, but I generally don't like using tennis ball as an outlet for chase because the repetitive motion of playing tennis ball, it's just so hard on our dog's joints. And
Yeah,
I mean, prey doesn't move in a straight line. It doesn't bounce. It jinks
true.
and it moves around, and the chase would never normally last as long as us playing ball with our dogs would.
Hmm.
So generally for some dogs, so I use a flirt pole with my dogs. Well, actually, I'll be more specific. I use a flirt pole with Nico. Cruz and Milo have no interest in the flirt pole. Um,
Okay, so explain what a flirt pole is for those
if,
of us that don't
so
know what it
a
is.
flirt pole, if you're a cat owner, you'd be probably a lot more familiar with this term. So a flirt pole is basically just a long pole. It's usually a telescopic pole, and it has a rope from it. So it can either be a full tug rope, or has like a very thin elasticated rope, and it has a toy at the end of the rope.
Mhm.
So we can move it around and basically tease our dogs with it and allow them to chase this particular toy. So you'd see this an awful lot with cats. So cat toys in particular, you see it just looks like a little fishing rod with a little toy at the end of it.
The feather or
Um,
something at the end, yeah.
yeah. Whereas dog ones, obviously, they have to be a little bit more robust because
Yeah,
they're a lot stronger than cats. So
exactly.
sorry.
Sorry,
Um,
I was going to ask. So obviously chasing after a moving target is what's interesting. And is it then the randomness, or the supposed randomness of the movements that are probably going to be interesting for and enriching for the animals then?
Yeah, so when a chase is triggered, which actually I should have said as well, when in stalk mode as well. So we talk about dopamine in the seeking and the sighting, whereas
Hmm.
when our dogs stalk and chase, they get a rush of adrenaline as well as dopamine. So their movements will be a lot quicker, a lot snappier.
Hmm.
So, and it's a, they get a real buzz out of it. They get a real buzz chasing something. Um, so, but yeah, with a flirt pole, because you can move it, you can make it go slower, you can make it move faster, you can allow it to change direction really quickly. It gives our dogs kind of a more realistic outlet for chasing something. But we touched on dog sports already. There's also another dog sport called lure coursing, where you
Hmm.
have a gigantic machine that literally drags it's like a plastic bag on a rope, and our dogs get to chase the plastic bag down the length of a field, and sometimes the bag might change direction, like prey
Hmm.
would. So that it's not just straight line, it gets that, whoa, it's moved, I'm gonna go after it this way instead. So it
Yeah.
gets it gets that instinctual movement and chase, so that it's not repetition, 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 repetition. It's one and done until your next go with lure coursing.
Okay, and I suppose when you mention adrenaline, I'm presuming that that these stalk and chase activities can be highly addictive for animals as well.
Yes, that's where we would see dogs being addicted to the ball, and to certain games of even tuggy and stuff like that, where they're like, no, 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 keep going. I didn't say stop. Come on, let's keep playing this. I'm having the best time. But we would see an element of addiction in particular with chasing the ball, which we like, especially for collies. You always hear people go, "Oh, my collie's addicted to their ball." Well, obsessed with their ball, but the correct term would probably actually be addicted to the ball.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose, like anything, too much of a good thing can also be a bad thing.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
And I suppose we know where it comes from in the natural world, and the chase is easy-ish to replicate because there's so many different ways of getting a dog to willingly chase after something like a flirt pole object and all this. So,
For Paul,
um,
or we could also, so I meant to say as well with Cruz, one of Cruz's favorite things. So when I'm doing training with Cruz, I'll bowl a treat along the ground. So it doesn't always have to be an object, and it doesn't always have to be food, but we can use both of those. So literally bowling a piece of food along the ground and allowing him to chase that. That allows that, whoa. So the second I do it, you can see his entire body language changes, and he pounces after the treat as it rolls down the footpath. So that gives him an outlet, because Cruz is not in any way a toy motivated dog. He's not interested in toys, but he loves a good treat. A good Ruby Reese treat.
very good. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. So we've gone through kind of what I see as the first half of the predatory sequence. Now it's an arbitrary half, and there's kind of 4 or 5, as we've said, rough segments left that we'd like to consider. Um, we're going to come back and talk about these in a part 2 segment of the podcast about the rest of the sequence, and it's getting more exciting as we move along. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing this part with us, and really looking forward to tuning in again with you and finding out the rest of the sequence. Thank you so much, Darina. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. No worries. Look forward to it. See you then.
Thank you. Bye. And a huge thank you once again to Darina for that really interesting chat. I'm so looking forward to part 2. And of course, if you are interested in joining us for the second part of that conversation, don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it. And next Tuesday, you'll be able to listen in on the rest of the predatory sequence with Darina. In the meantime, you might like to check out what Darina has on her social media and website. So we will be putting all of the details for Polaris dog training in the show notes. And you'll also, of course, be able to find the Ruby Reese social media and the rest of it there as well. If you would like to support us as a small business, you can head on over to ruby-reese.com. And that is all for this week. Really looking forward to part 2 next Tuesday, and I hope to see you then.